Hey guys, it's Bales. I'm at DraftKings and wanted to break down a couple of my lineups from week 4. So I look at the highest scoring lineup, which we're looking at now, and then the lowest scoring that I had. And so this was in the power sweep. I think this was a 150 entry. With 1,111 people. Top lineup I had got ninth. I think this was a three entry max. So I had two of them cash, one just outside of the cash line. And so I went with Flacco to Steve Smith as my stack. I actually didn't think it would be this popular, and I didn't look, but I'm pretty sure both of those guys were probably lower owned at lower stakes. We can see this is my model from week 4 on FantasyLabs. I had Flacco. It came up number 2 in the model, and then I also work on some ownership prediction trends, and those suggested that Flacco and Steve Smith would be a bit lower, as did our ownership projections from Levitan. So he had Flacco at 2 to 4%. He's projecting for the Millionaire Maker, so it is different. And he had Steve Smith, who is also high in my receiver model, he was like number 6 in the model at 2 to 4%. So you can see they were much higher, 8.1 and 12.5%, but did well against the Raiders there. Jordan Howard and Carlos Hyde just super chalky, and really this lineup was chalky overall. Actually 4 guys above 25%, with Zach Miller and Antonio Brown. I think I said last week I'm fine with pretty much eating ownership on running backs, particularly cheap running backs who are going to see volume. So that's what we saw with Howard and Hyde, and just thought that those were sort of obvious plays. Hyde was actually my top running back by a mile, and my top running back exposure of the week. Howard I got on a little bit more later, and it was really just because of the price. But you can see we had both of those guys projected at 17 to 20 at higher stakes. They're going to be higher. Still fine with it. Could have been potentially a little bit more contrarian, but the semi-contrarian, not really contrarian, but semi-contrarian play was Julio Jones at 10%. Obviously, anytime you get a guy like him, pretty much any matchup at 10%, you'd probably take it. And he was my top receiver exposure. I had a little over half of my money, or it might have been around 60% on Julio, so that was good overall. The week was, I thought, about average in terms of how I picked the players other than Julio, but then obviously having Julio and having him not be in like 36% of lineups like Antonio Brown is obviously very, very beneficial. Zach Miller I didn't think was a good play given that ownership, so I didn't think it would be that low. I didn't have that much exposure to him, so same thing with the Redskins D here, but the opposite, where I didn't have much of them because I thought that they were going to be much higher owned. They were only at 2.7% of this because of the price. So I think what we're seeing is at higher stakes, people are more price sensitive, which makes sense. Better players generally at higher stakes, and they're thus better at identifying value. And so those guys who are a little bit overpriced, I think they were 3,500 on the week, so there were just some better values. So they were at only 2.7%. We projected them, the Redskins, they were number 4 in my model at 9 to 12, so big difference. And you can see they were actually higher in the 300. So this is the lineup in the 300. We'll see if there's any dramatic ownership differences. Hyde a bit lower, Mike Evans a little bit lower, Julio substantially higher. That's about 50% higher in the 300. And I did think Julio was probably the best GPP play of the week, even at 15.9%. That's a really low number for someone like him. So yeah, that was pretty much my thinking on the lineup there. It was generally chalkier than what I would normally play. And we'll look at my lowest scoring lineup here. So I had I think 18 lineups, maybe in the 300 and top 1,000 cash. So I cashed 6 of 18, 33% is okay. Generally good. A couple out right outside on the bubble there. You can see a bunch. And so a lot of these lineups cashed at slightly lower stakes, and that's just what we're going to see, higher cash line consistently in higher stakes. So this is my worst lineup by far. This one got almost last, I think, 4102 out of 4170. You can see it really had nothing except for 2 players, Matt Jones, who I really liked. He was probably the one running back who was low ownership who was on a lot. I think I had Matt Jones in like 27% of lineups or something like that. Both he and LeGarrette Blount are types of running backs I don't generally play, but just thought that they were good values. We can see where they were in model. Blount was number 3, Matt Jones number 5. But I generally don't like those guys because they can't catch passes, and obviously that's bad on DK. But sometimes the price warrants it, and I thought that Matt Jones was he still will catch a little bit. He did have 2 receptions, and even Blount had 3 receptions, which was surprising for all of 4 yards. But Blount did really poorly, and they were just, that game script obviously was not working in their favor. In hindsight, maybe Blount with Brady, for example, has a much different outlook than with Brissett. So the stack I used here was Breeze to Fleener, and really this was one that I just forced in. I had almost no Breeze and pretty little Fleener as well, and it might have been a situation where I should have faded. This is the second time, the time that Breeze played the Giants too. He was also very low in my model. I forget where he was this week, and not super low, but pretty low here. I mean, below Russell Wilson, who was my top exposure at quarterback on DK. Luckily, I really liked Russell Wilson just because I figured he was going to be very low owned, and I did move off him a little bit on Sunday just because there were reports that even though he practiced all week, that he might not be running around too much, which he didn't, but he just threw the ball really well. Jets have probably the most overrated pass defense in the league, really good at stopping the run. So this was really just trying to get Breeze into something. I did have Fleener a bit higher, but again, creating some of those trends that I've been using to help identify the best tournament plays. Fleener came out much, much lower than that. I think outside of the top 10 actually. Even at the price. So I mean, there's a lot of variance with something like that, and it doesn't mean that it's very difficult to look at something and say that's a good play or a bad play after just 1 week. But going back on the logic, I think that there was a case to potentially fade Breeze there, and same thing with Blount. I had too much Blount, about double his ownership in this league, the 300, I think it was a 333. I had closer to about 30%, and really I think made a mistake on that, given the possible game script and how limited Blount's ceiling was, maybe relative to his floor, which was very, very low. So Demaryius Thomas was a hit. You can see these are the prototypical types of receivers I'm going to use other than who I put in the flex, but Hopkins, Jeffrey, Demaryius, big, super talented, can score. Obviously that trio did very, very poorly overall. And again, this lineup is, I would say, just overall not reflective of my exposure. Only Matt Jones and Blount, I think, were guys who I had in quite a few lineups. And then Torrey Smith was a pure contrarian play. I had he and Bryce Butler in a few. Bryce Butler did pretty well, but just cheap guys who I thought could potentially do well in that game. And Torrey Smith, obviously, the 0.2% is good, but the one catch for 3 yards is not. I think that came at the end of the game. I watched most of it. I don't even remember him being targeted very much at all. So, yeah, that was my thinking on those. Obviously, very different results. You can see the overall results, and I guess the average finishes is probably going to be more indicative of how I selected players, or how you select players in a given week. So 4,170 people in this. So we're looking at right around 2,100 being the 50th percentile, and I had I guess 14 out of 18. Looks like maybe in the top 30% or so. So overall, that's good. And a lot of those, like I said, in different lower stakes leagues that were finished inside the cash line. But yeah, I like to go through each of these, and definitely suggest that you do the same if you're on FantasyLabs, and you can change the date up here to go back and see your model over time. So you can go back to different weeks, and you can also actually build lineups retroactively. So we're looking at a few weeks ago here. You can generate multiple lineups, set whatever parameters you want, generate it like you would be going into a week, and then you can actually see actual points scored, which is really valuable, and just continue to do that and get a really good sample of what would have happened as you go back and retroactively look at your model and tweak it and things like that. But really good practice to not just move on and assume that your process is good. It can always be improved, and definitely made some mistakes here and did some good things this week as well. But yeah, just going to be going back to labs, tweaking things, working on some different trends, and hopefully improving going into week 5.